Very foggy indeed. Okay, I'm at the top of the hill again. It's very foggy, as you can see. I can't see my hand in front of my face. In fact, I got lost a little while down there. And now I'm just sheltering amongst some rocks, trying to keep out the wind a bit. But I'm thinking about objectivity and subjectivity again, those terms. I put a video up last night about that. Several responses. Well, one video response from Gary. And I was actually going to check something. Okay, I thought he wasn't recording, sorry about that. A video response from Gary. I mean, didn't post it as a response because you never do, Gary. Ahead of your time there, not using the video response function. And several comments which were quite interesting, which I'll come on to. I mean, firstly, just as a recap, what I was suggesting in that video is these terms objective and subjective. We use them a lot in casual conversation. They're also used in more technical conversations, and they have uses, but they're not the only game in town, and in many ways it's not helpful, I don't think, always to think that we can categorise the world of information, knowledge, or even something like morality, which is a different kind of knowledge, I would suggest, that we can easily categorise this into these terms, and it's, I just that's problematic. It's very limiting, really. And there's lots of other ways of doing it. In Gary's video, your video, Gary, said, well, what else is there? Well, there's lots, and I've made lots of videos in the past, and you've responded to some of them, so you know this perfectly well. There's situated knowledge and embodied knowledge and possessive, proactive, performative knowledge. There's data, information, knowledge, wisdom, hierarchies. There's a wide range of different ways of talking about how we understand things and how we come to know things and what the relationship with different forms of knowing are. So the objective-subjective one is, it has its uses, but it's not the only game in town by any means, and it's singularly inappropriate for the lot of conversations we have. And just on the topic of conversation, I think, and I guess I'm talking to you again, Gary, here, you pick up on me saying that this is just conversation as opposed to serious philosophical thought, and this is only fairly uninformed. And you suggest that you are informed about this and other people may not be. Well, that's not the case. I mean, you're singularly uninformed about a lot of this stuff. In the most literal sense, I don't think you've read a lot of books about it. I just don't think you've got a lot of information. You're uninformed. I'm not saying you're thick. You might be thick. That's a different topic. But I think you are uninformed. And that's revealed in what you say and how you say it. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is a serious and useful conversation which I enjoy having. I don't want all my conversations to be philosophically, technically narrow and focused. I enjoy this. This has got a different kind of set of pleasures and uses for me, and for all of us, I hope. But it's not a philosophical conversation. It really isn't. It's a conversation which is also had by people who do philosophy in better ways than us. We're doing conversation right now. But when we do use these terms, subjective and objective, in conversation, we use them really sloppily. That's no doubt about that at all. I'm not going to bother with examples. I've made tons and tons of videos about this. And as I say, they're not the only ways of looking at it. But there's some interesting things come out of this, which I found really interesting, in the comments section and in Gary's video. And let me look at the comments section first. I had a great comment exchange with this chap this morning. He seemed like a really nice enough guy. I don't know you, I'm sorry. But he just made this statement that objective, basically it's saying that objective and subjective were valid categories, and the objective is the basis of everything we know. And I just put a comment back saying, basis? He said, yeah, the basis. It's central to the true philosophy and the gaining of knowledge. Central? Gaining? See, what I think is lost in a lot of this conversation is the slipperiness of our language and the slipperiness of our thought. Because when we think about this stuff, it seems so bloody obvious. It almost defines what obviousness is, this kind of stuff. And when we explain it to ourselves, of course it feels obvious, it feels real, it feels true. But we should have a little bit of trepidation about that. We should be sceptical about those feelings, because they are feelings. The feeling of being certain, the feeling of having access to truth, the feeling of knowing something. It's a felt sense, that. and sometimes it can be deceptive. A lot of the time it can be deceptive. But when we do feel that we're in possession of knowledge, when we feel like we've gained it, I mean, just feel that word, gained knowledge, as if knowledge is a substance that we've acquired, a resource that we've accumulated. When we feel that we've gained it, that feeling comes from the idea, the structure of the ideas that we're using. So when this chap is saying it's basic, he's using a foundationalist metaphor. That this thing he thinks of as objective knowledge, whatever that may be, he's placing it at the bottom. And it's something that's at the bottom of a kind of structure, foundationalist. But then he switches it to it's central to philosophy. So there he's got a centre-periphery model. So it associates more with things like prototypical examples in radial categories, or associates more with core concepts. It's a centre-periphery model. And then he talks about it being essential. So then it becomes a property, and an essence metaphor is being mobilized. And then, as I say, gaining knowledge, as if knowledge is a resource that you accumulate. So all the time that this obviousness is being felt, it's being relayed through this shifting, swirling set of misty metaphors. It doesn't feel like that, I'm sure, to this person. And unless you're kind of sensitized to the movement of language and thought in this kind of way that I'm suggesting here, it doesn't feel like that at all. It just feels like you're expressing the obvious in slightly different ways. But that feeling of obviousness is coming from those modes of expression and thought. And so they're very deceptive. I mean, they're useful. There are times when it's really useful to be able to draw on a foundationalist understanding. And there are times when it's really useful to be able to draw on a centre-periphery model or an essence model, or the other ones that I've talked about, crossword puzzle metaphors, or there's just dozens of them. Know your art's boat, which is this idea of a ship that you're endlessly rebuilding. There's lots of different models to do it, but the model isn't reality. The menu is not the meal. The map is not the territory, as Kodzybski says. These are the ways in which we understand. These aren't the things that we are understanding, and that distinction is really important. You have to sometimes turn the focus on the means by which you are coming to understand something. And applying terms like objective, subjective is one of those means by which we come to an understanding. It's not the understanding itself. So that's weird, really. And just to return to Gary's video, there, Gary, you're talking about... sorry, but some of this stuff is... I'm sure I'm not denying your seriousness and sincerity, but some of the stuff is just nuts, I'm afraid. I mean, at one point you used the term objective perspective. I mean, just think about what that means. Objective perspective. If you've got any kind of a sense of what you're saying, that should have the same significance as the smell of burning rubber does to an electrician. Objective perspective? That's an oxymoron. It makes no sense. You can't have an objective perspective. Perspectives use visual metaphors of viewpoints and worldviews, and objective denies that. So it's just nuts, I'm afraid. Sorry. And you also do this thing where you consign other ways of knowing or other structures of knowing. You've probably already done it with this video so far, as being kind of poetics, I think you call it, poetry, which is fine, I have no problem with that word. But you do that just after you've drawn a picture of a racecourse and said that accurately depicts reality. You've constructed a metaphor of knowledge like a racecourse with the horses and the jockeys and the owners and the people in the stands and the horses themselves, all having different kinds of perspectives on this experience. And then you create some kind of divine figure overseeing the whole damn thing, which you claim represents objectivity, kind of reinventing God, by the way. And then suggest that any other way of looking at the world is poetic. No, that's poetics. That you created an analogy, and then you're arguing for the analogy. Do you understand what I mean? It's model-dependent reality, and you draw the model, And quite frankly, it's a very limited model. And there are far better models out there. And if you spent more time gaining information, you would have a more informed set of ideas to bring to the table, as opposed to just sincerity and a bit of gift of the gab. So this objective subjective thing, it's very limited in use, is where I'm going with this. And yes, you can use it to produce the feeling of being right, and yes, you can use it to produce the feeling of being certain. And if you're talking to people who aren't, thinking properly, or who are easily convinced, then you can convince people they're right. And that's what the Christians do. The fundamentalist Christians who endlessly talk about objective reality. It's exactly the same language, and it's the same models that are being mobilized. And they'll find audiences for people who are easily made to feel certain if the right models are put in front of them, if the right race course is described to them. And that's the same thing. But we should be past that, really. I think, in my squatting spot in the rocks.